Such stubbornness posed a dilemma. If Mary was prudent, she'd lose the arrow before the wizard could complete the magic. But she wouldn't be able to question Nanitha if she killed her. And common sense told her it was difficult for any marksman, even a wizard, to target a foe while looking in the opposite direction. So she hesitated a heartbeat, and the blonde woman pressed her hands to her own face. As far as Mary could see, nothing happened as a result. Nanitha uncovered her feathers and said, "Quiet, Sable." The terrier yipped a final time, then subsided. The wizard turned, revealing a flawlessly beautiful, heart-shaped countenance worthy of a heroic, of, worthy of a heroine in one of the sagas in which she had evidently doted. "What are you? No, who are you?" the woman asked. "And what do you want?" Mary released the tension on her bow and pointed the arrow at the floor, but kept it in the string, or on the string. "My name is Mary Buckman. I'm a guide for the Red Heart Guild. I apologize for bursting in on you this way, but my business is urgent and your staff didn't want to let me in to see you. I like my privacy. I won't intrude on it any longer than necessary. I just need you to answer a few questions. A robber stole a strongbox from the courtyard in the Piera. I know, everybody does. You must be the ranger who lost the prize." Mary sighed and said, "What, everyone doesn't know is the name What everyone doesn't know is the name of the thief, or at least no one has been willing to tell me. But I've learned he's a friend of yours. He and his 3 accomplices drank here often. As I'm sure you've seen, the dance is a busy place. Many rogues squander their loot here. But sometimes you invited this particular scoundrel who's young, lean, fit, and wears a goatee to wander back to your suite and visit you." "You're mistaken. I don't believe you," Mary said, "and I promise I'll pay for information." "The dance brings in all the coin I need," Nanitha said. "Now, please go." "I'm sorry, it isn't that easy." "Let's be clear then," the woman asked. "Are you threatening to shoot me if I refuse to betray a friend?" Even as frustrated as she was, Mary didn't have the stomach for such callous retribution, but she didn't have to admit as such. "Why shouldn't I kill you?" she said. You provide a haven for the worst kind of vermin to conduct their business and pursue depraved amusements. That makes you as bad as they are. It must be nice out in the wilderness where everything is simple, good or evil, gold or dung. In Weeble, we live as best we can. If your goal is to live, give me the robber's name." "No," Nanitha said. "I don't have many friends. It's hard to make them when you spend your days in a cellar, and Sable and my books aren't enough to hold the loneliness at bay. The few companions I do have brighten my days. with the stories of their adventures, and the lad you seek has told me some splendid ones. Mary wondered if Neneth, or Mary wondered if Nanitha was an invalid or such a notorious fugitive that she dared not show her face in the city above, for she seemed to be saying she felt unable even to leave the confines of the Talendans. Whatever lies the wretch feeds you, Murray said, he's a common thief, not a hero out of your storybooks. The wizard shrugged. Look, Mary persisted. It's nice you have someone to keep you company, but a good many people will suffer if I don't recover the lockbox. Why? I'm not at liberty to say, but you have my word that it's the truth. Well, you have mine that I'd sooner push 100 strangers into the abyss than betray one friend. Nanitha fifted her hand, making a show of making a show of poisoning them for further conjuration, and added, now are you going to fight? No, Mary thought bitterly, we aren't. Now are we going to fight? No, Mary thought bitterly, we aren't. Nanitha had called her bluff, and that was it. It felt in keeping with the fundamental perversity of Weevil that the first, even vaguely honorable person she'd met in the underways have proved just as unwilling to help her as all the black-hearted scoundrels she'd questioned hitherto. She was pondering how to make a dignified exit when the dog yapped. I see you found her, Cephas said. Mary glanced over her shoulder. The monastic appeared unscathed and unruffled as usual. Thank me, my Maliki, the Ilmatar, that you're all right, Mary said. It was no great matter. I won the contest. The orc and the goblin took exception to it, and I had to knock each of them senseless. That started a brawl. Even the Umber Hawks. It turns out there are two, had some difficulty quelling. In the confusion, I slipped back here to join you. Once again, Mary was impressed. Logic suggested that when the fight had broken out, Cephas must have been at the very center of it. She'd surely needed almost preternatural powers of stealth and evasion to extricate herself from the fray. And what of you, the monastic continued. Are you finding the answers you seek? No, Nanitha said. She isn't. She was just leaving, and I ask you to do the same. You don't seem to realize the situation has changed, Cephas said. In the blink of an eye, a chakram appeared in her hand. The scout and I are both adept at combat. Perhaps your magic could fend off her or me alone, but not the two of us together. And after we've subdued you, we'll make sure you can't give us any more trouble. I've never yet met a mage who was much of a threat to it with broken fingers. nor I a warrior once she has burned the head from, once she was burned from head to toe, Nanetha replied. Mary would have sworn the doorway wasn't wide enough to accommodate two women without them squeezing and jostling one another. But Cephres twisted through in one sudden movement without even brushing her. Once inside the room, she had a clear shot with the chakram, and when she lifted it, the ranger realized she hadn't been bluffing. Mary snatched frantically and grabbed Cephres' arm. "No," she cried, her eyes cold, unreachable. Cephres stared at her. She knows, the monastic said. The Yonti said so. Still, Cephres took a breath and let it out slowly. "As you wish," she said. "It's your errand. I just came along to help as best I can." "I take it you're leaving?" Nanetha said. "Yes," Mary said. She started to turn away, then yielded to the urge to make one more try. "It's your own people, your own city, that will benefit if I recover the box." Such vagaries mean nothing," the wizard said. At the same time, Cephres murmured something under her breath, then sprang past Mary and dashed back down the hall. The ranger turned in time to see her comrade vanish into the conjuration chamber. What's she doing?" Nanetha asked, sounding rattled for the first time. "I don't know," Mary said. Cephres strode back into the view of the mage's open grimoire. One hand clenched the volume pages ready to tear. "Tell us what we need to know," the monastic said, "or I'll destroy this." "Is that supposed to frighten me?" Nanetha asked. "I can buy a new book or scribe one myself, if need be." "Yes," Cephres said, "but in the meantime, you won't have access to your magic. You won't be able to cover your face with a mask of illusion. Everyone will see your scars." Nanetha stared, swallowed, then said, "I have no idea what you mean." "Of course you do," Cephres replied. "Is this the page with the disguise spell?" The monastic ripped a leaf in half, crumpled the loose portion, and dropped it to the floor. "Or is it the next? Stop it, or I swear I'll burn you. While I'm holding the grimoire, I doubt it." She tore a second page. "Please," the wizard begged, all the defiance running out of her at once. "You're a woman too. Don't make me be ugly. My friends won't come to see me anymore." "Then the choice should be easy," Cephres said. "Betray one companion or lose them all." It took Nanetha several seconds to force the words out. "His name is Aaron Sar Rendell." Mary felt a pang of excitement, undercut by a muddling shame at the manner in which Cephres had extracted the information. "Where does he live?" the ranger asked. "I don't know. I don't think many people do. A lot of thieves are wary of letting folk know where they sleep. Well, fortunately, Mary said, the town is not huge. Did this Aaron talk to you about the plot to steal the strongbox?" "A little. The Red Axe hired him to do it." "The Red Axe? The biggest gang in Weevil?" "Then by now," said Mary glumly, "he's delivered the coffer to them." Anitha hesitated for an instant, as if trying to decide whether to risk a lie. "No," the wizard said. "For some reason, he didn't hand it over, and now they're looking for him too." For once, the ranger thought maybe the Oweblin propensity for double-dealing would work in her favor. "Then we have to find him first," said Mary. Aaron glanced over his shoulder. He didn't have any particular reason to think anyone was shadowing him, but he was but it was ingrained. It was an ingrained habit to check. If so, he caught sight of Weeble, its towers, some visibly leaning black against the evening sky. Ordinarily the view would have pleased him, but the tangled spires seemed somehow threatening. Just then, like the writhing facial tentacles of those green centipede-like monsters that sometimes crawl into the underways from Mascalone knows where. He snorted, his momentum uneasiness away. Weeble was home, as good as a home as an outlaw could want, and if it had treated him harshly those past couple days, that was part of what made life within the environs so exciting. He'd sell the contents of the lockbox, lie low until everyone tired of hunting him, and eventually would be all right. He hiked on into the stand of trees, trying with some success to keep the dry fallen leaves from crunching beneath his feet, enjoying the sharp scent of the pines. Night engulfed the world, but Saloon shed enough silvery glow to guide him. He didn't bother to light his lantern until he reached the glade at the center of the wood where he and Caridi had sometimes picnicked. The benighted clearing has hardly the ideal workplace in which to crack open a magically protected coffer, but Aaron hadn't dared tackle the job in the center of town. If he triggered more thunderclaps, they were likely to lead some of his various and sundry ill-wishers straight to him. Out there in the countryside, at least. Out there in the countryside, that at least ought not be a problem. Aaron found a level bit of ground, unrolled the white sheet he'd brought, and set the steel case on top of it. He unpacked the tools he'd taken from Burgell's flat and felt himself tensing, his pulse ticking faster. Aaron willed himself to relax. Maybe he was no master cracksman like the faithless gnome, certainly no wizard, but he knew the basics of defeating magical traps. He thought that if he was careful, methodical, He thought that if he was careful, methodical, he could get the box open without killing himself in the process. He peered at the case through a topaz lens. It didn't reveal anything. It didn't reveal anything he hadn't seen already, so he pulled the cork from the glass vial and dusted one side of the strongbox with gray powder. The coarse grains crawled and clumped together, forming letters and geometric figures, covering over and thus revealing the invisible symbols a spellcaster had drawn upon the still. So far so good, he thought, but now comes the tricky part. Aaron picked up a file and scraped at the glyphs, defacing them, metal rasping on metal. Though in theory he knew at which angle and juncture he could attack the symbols safely, he kept wanting to flinch as he imagined the magic rousing and striking at him in some devastating fashion. It didn't though, not then and not when he neutralized the sigils on the other faces of the box. He sighed with relief and picked up the brass key, which still apparently in constant flux, which still appeared in constant flux, even though he couldn't feel it changing shape between his thumbs and fourth finger. He slipped it into the lock and twisted. Perhaps he felt it stick or shiver. In any event, he sensed he had to let it go immediately. He snatched his hand back. The thunder boomed a split second later. The blast slammed him onto his back and brought loose twigs and dead leaves showering down from the branches overhead. Half dazed, he climbed back up onto his haunches, felt a wetness in his mustache, and wiped a smear of it onto his fingertips. He rose. His nose was bleeding. He felt a jab of anger, a regret he'd ever come within 100 leagues of that wretched box that had killed his friends. He wanted to grab it and fling it into the underbrush, never to be found or trouble anymore again. But naturally, he didn't really feel that way. No thief truly wanted to cast away his loot. Had he won it at great cost, that was just no. Had he won it at great cost, that was just reason to prize it all the more. He swallowed his frustrations and pondered the task at hand. Maybe the glyphs were only decoys. In any case, spoiling them hadn't silenced the thunder, and he didn't see any other way to attempt it. But so far, the blast had only sounded when someone inserted a pick or skeleton key in the lock. Maybe he could open the case in another way. He turned it around so that he could get at the hinges. Try as he might, he couldn't loosen the pins. It was as if they weren't merely fastened, but frozen, glued, or rusted in place. He assumed another enchantment was to blame. Well, maybe he had the counter magic for that one. He opened another of Burgel's vials and poured a quantity of viscous blue fluid on each of the hinges. Brewed by one of the outlaw community's more capable alchemists, the oil wasn't merely slippery. Rather, according to the gnome, it embodied the fundamental idea of slipperiness. Aaron wasn't sure what that really meant, and he had a hunch it might just be impressive sounding mumbo jumbo, but he knew from personal experience that the lubricant was slick enough to unstick almost anything. He resumed his assault on the hinges. The component parts seemed to loosen, nudgingly by infinitesimal degrees, only to tighten back up as soon as he released pressure from them. At first, in the uncertain light, he wasn't sure, but eventually he saw that was exactly what was happening. Like living creatures, the mechanisms were resisting vivisection, screwing and jamming themselves back together. Most likely that meant he wouldn't be able to disassemble them. By loosening them, he had, however, temporarily opened a crack between the lid and bottom of the box, which until then had fit perfectly together. In desperation, he drew his largest earthen fang, a blade sturdy enough to double as a lever, shoved it into the gap, braced the coffer, and pried with all his strength. The hinges tore with a screech of tortured steel. The two halves of the strong box popped apart, and the thrice damned thunderclap boomed once more, bashing him like a club. He grasped a curse, and when he succeeded in blinking the tears of pain from his vision, perceived that the coffer hadn't yet finished giving him trouble. A vapor waffled from the interior of the box, swirling and coalescing into a squat, dark thing. At first glance, it was vaguely toad-like, but then he made out the 6 stubby arms terminating in 4-fingered hands, and the 3 eyes positioned asymmetrically and shifting around at the ends of flexible lumps. The central mass of it was either all head or all torso, determining on how one cared to look at it, with a bizarre vertical maw that opened it almost all the way down to the sexless crotch when it bared its fangs. It orientated on Aaron and charged, covering ground as fast as a man despite the seeming handicap of its stumpy legs. Aaron scrambled backwards, tried to pose his earthen fang to meet the threat, then realized he'd lost hold of it. The largest and most formidable of his weapons, when the final thunderclap boomed, he snatched out a throwing knife, a flat, leaf-shaped blade with a leather-wrapped handle, and hurled it. It pierced the guardian demon's flesh, but the creature kept coming. Still retreating, Aaron flung a second dagger, though it put out one of the apparition's eyes. That didn't stop it either. It suddenly sprinted even faster, leaning forward so its jaws were poised to bite off the legs of its prey. His heart pounded. Aaron made himself stand still until the last possible instant. The way the demon would have trouble compensating when he dodged. Unless, of course, he delayed too long, in which case it would simply catch him in its spike-like teeth. He sprung to the side and stabbed with his fourth and next last dagger. The demon's teeth clashed shut, missing him, and the blade rammed deep into its flank. Using his offhand, he bashed it with his cudgel. Unfortunately, that still didn't slow it down. Pivoting, yanking the hilt of the knife from his grasp, it grabbed to his leg with its broad, stubby-fingered hands, no doubt seeking to hold him fast long enough to bring its jaws to bear. Its talons grabbed through his breeches and the skin beneath. He wrenched himself free, but he lost his balance in so doing. He reeled backwards, fell on his rump, and the demon pounced on top of him. Its jaws gaped, reaching for his head. Terrified, he jammed the club between them. It seemed to hold them open for a moment, but the wood bowed under the pressure. In another second, it would snap. Aaron whipped his final knife from his boot and plunged it into the demon's side. The creature thrashed, made an ugly gargling sound, and stinking slime geysered up from its maw. Its death throes broke the cudgel in two, and it slumbered motionlessly. Aaron dragged himself out from underneath the carcass, then sat until he stopped panting and shivering. He was used to fighting people, even if he didn't often enjoy it. But demons were another matter. Still, he tested the vile thing, and it was time to see what his victory had gained him. Trying to brush away the sludge the spirit had puked onto his tunic, he strode back to the sundered halves of the broken strongbox. His prize lay in the puddle. In the pudded bottom. His prize laid in the padded bottom section, where it fit snugly. It was a big, old-looking book bound in black. As he reached for it, it occurred to Aaron that perhaps he still hadn't reached the end of the wards. The shadows of mask he'd already contended with, the warning screen, the glimmering that neutralized his invisibility, spells of locking, thunderclaps, and a guardian imp. Surely even the most cautious shipper would have deemed those protections sufficient. And in any case, Aaron was simply too impatient to muck around with Burgell's tools and powders any longer. He picked up the book, and nothing disastrous happened as a result. The tome had a little embossed on the cover and spine with a few flecks of gold leaf still clinging to the letters. But since Aaron couldn't read, that was no help. His father had sometimes encouraged him to learn, but he had always seemed like no but encouraged him to learn, but it had always seemed like a lot of effort for a minimum return.